All right, you're set.
Okay. All right, work sessions are an opportunity for board members to discuss issues informally with staff and invited guests. The board encourages members of the public to attend work sessions and listen to the discussion, but there's generally no opportunity for public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the board are welcome to do so during the board's regularly scheduled meetings. First is discussion of the formal agenda. Any discussion? Okay. We're good on that? We have two topics on our work session. We have the board topics for discussion and the housing amendments. And I understand the housing amendments is probably going to take a lot longer. So do we want to start with that? Yeah. Let's go ahead and start with the housing amendments update.
Sorry, Neil.
No, I think so.
You can sit right here, but we're Anthony.
Anthony's banished.
He came in and looked. No, came in and looked around and what?
All right, well, thank you. This is my first time at the little table.
Welcome to the table.
So I wanted to come and meet with your board this evening to talk and get some additional direction about where we want to head with our proposed amendments. We came in before your board on October 4th and presented a whole slate of amendments. There were 11 different things that we were looking at, and at that time, generally, your board was agreeable with moving forward. So we scheduled a public works information session that was held on January 17th. And that summary of that feedback is included in your board packet today. And really tonight, there are three questions that I want to really have a discussion with your board. And those are on page 11 of your agenda packet. And I guess my first question really is seeing the work session meeting possibly read through the list of comments and staff responses. And I know that there have been several emails that have been sent in from the public over the past few days. I guess my first basic question is this something that your board still wants to move forward with? And I think that will set the direction for where we move with the other question.
I think that's a loaded one.
Yeah.
Specifically speaking or generically speaking?
Generically speaking, because if there is interest in moving forward, then what I would need from your board is additional direction about any amendments you would want to eliminate, revise, anything that we've missed that you would like to add to the amendments. Any questions that you might have about the feedback and the staff response that might help you make an informed decision. So.
I would like to proceed because I would like the public comment. I would like to have broader comment. I know we have a few emails, but I'd like to have more input, public input, more planning commission input. So during the process, yes, I'd like to proceed in the process. We can make recommendations and we can look at other items that they can discuss, but I'd like to keep going.
I mean, I don't think exploration is a bad thing. And frankly, I mean, I agree with Commissioner Toyota on that, you know, 35 people attending, this doesn't seem like a lot to me.
In fairness, it was a good turnout considering that was 2 days after the ice storm.
Yeah.
Well, that's
and
not-
we had tried it the
Yeah.
night before, and we had internet issues.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I concur with Toyota.
And I agree that's good turnout, but I think there's still a lot more voices, and it will hopefully through the formal process, we would get a lot more voices. That's
I'd
right.
like to piggyback on that because I'm for proceeding as well. The housing crisis is so compelling and so dire that I want to keep us moving forward. Sitting in an LTDC meeting, there is research to show, I'm not going to give you all the particular research to show that the participants in the land use planning process are consistently older, whiter, and richer than the average Oregonian. I hear your concern about a wider scope. The output of that research was, well, if you want to have more diverse input, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So I don't know how we balance impending budget shortfalls with spending more money on anything. I think this is where I want to listen to everything that everybody has to say but also consider the voices that are not at the table because they are not, I would say they don't have enough spare time or money or energy or whatever it takes to participate in those conversations, but they still count. Because I think sometimes the people who show up are so devoted to the process, so experienced, so passionate, they think whatever is said should be all that is considered. And I want to gently modify their expectation. I want to manage it so they understand that we are looking at everybody, including the people who are not physically present at the table. But yes, let us please move forward.
Okay, Commissioner Webb?
Oh, well, I'm definitely in favor of moving forward. Incidentally, I really liked this format that you used about the questions, because there were a lot of questions that were asked that I thought, I don't know the answer to this, but you obviously did have answers to all of that. And it's a great format. It really is.
Thank you, and thanks to Jay for taking notes and highlighting the questions.
Okay. Good. Well, but I think that we have to solve the caps issue before we go forward with it. I think we have to make a determination about STR caps. And, I think a lot of certainly some of the more recent comments that we've got, I think have talked about that. And I think there are a lot of people waiting for that cap discussion to happen. And I think we owe it to it, since we did do a lot of conversation about it last year. And so I think before we do this, we've got to address the cap issue in rural areas in some way. I think we've got to deal with it. And I do think, I guess I believe that citizen involvement in Oregon, besides being goal number one, I think it depends on what techniques you use. I think depends on the type of area that you're talking to. And I think that since we have such a good public outreach capability now, that we might try some different things. Maybe something school-based, I always love to bring teenagers in and see what they think about stuff. And it's always fun with language that they don't usually know that we have as formidable a land use system that we do. And often it's good education for them, and it goes on to their parents, which is often a very, very welcome contributors. So absolutely, I think that I agree with the other comments with Commissioner Thompson, especially that, we've got a housing crisis here. And I thought that a lot of the suggested things were terrific. I mean, I think we've got to get going. We've got to get going. And I say we'll go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're all in agreement on moving forward.
Could I ask one more question though? Short-term rental caps are certainly an issue that matters to a lot of people, as is housing that is developed for the second homeowner or other vacation part-time residential use. I'm concerned about the availability of affordable housing. I don't know how we see to that, but STRs are just part of that issue. There are economic issues boiling out of this. How do we, as a county board of commissioners, what do you think, County Manager? Do you have any input on this? Because what we're doing, we can't control what the private sector does. We can set in structures and constraints. We can support, how do we do our best to assure that the needed affordable workforce housing becomes available? Because for me, that underpins a lot of my urgency about all of these issues. It's not a fair question, but I ask you, and you can say, I don't know, or I don't want to answer.
Well, I think it's, it's like a lot of things. It is complex. It's not a simple answer. When you look at what the housing needs are for the county, what we know is that they're at all types and all levels. And so, and our conversations are always limited to the unincorporated areas. And so a lot of the housing and the housing study said this, I mean, the preponderance of the housing is going to be developed within cities. So then really for the county, it is how do we become relevant to be part of that discussion with the geography and the tools that a county has, which are different than usually the geography and the tools that a city has. And so how do we stay relevant given what our niche is? And we have a niche. And so that's where I think it gets, that's where the complexities are and the simplicity are. And so for us, we know that there's not going to be a lot of dense urbanized development in the unincorporated areas. And where there's more is where there are infrastructure. So where there's infrastructure, you tend to have more density. And sometimes where the infrastructure is are also parts of communities that may not want that additional density. But when you look at the housing needs, infrastructure is a main piece. One of the big barriers we have, even within cities, is the lack of infrastructure capacity. And so I think that certainly the housing that gets built, we want it to be housing that's available to meet the housing needs. And I think that's some of the comments that the board has received, and certainly there are options the board could do to make some of those new housing units available for housing units and not for short-term purposes. And those are things that will probably come up through this process. But as we all know, the way that the caps work is that even caps countywide, it's not going to diminish the number of STRs, at least within the unincorporated areas. It can create a cap so that they don't proliferate further. But then it's really trying to say, how do we take full advantage of the investment that is being made by the state, by local governments, by private developers to create the housing? How do we make sure that the housing goes to where the need is? And where the need is we have people who literally cannot live anywhere close to where they work. And we have difficulties recruiting as organizations because people can't live in the communities that they work. And so, I mean, I think that this is a huge public policy issue. It's going to take a lot of drive from the private sector, some of these kinds of tools that the board's looking at from a regulatory side, but it's also going to take some contemplation about how do we really take full advantage of the investment and the opportunity to make sure that the housing is available to serve those that are most in need for it in the community. And that's a hard balance. And I think it's one of those issues, like a lot of public policy issues, that you just keep working on over a generation. And so, so I think there's a lot of components to it, and I don't have any, public policy pixie to throw at it. But I just think that if we stay focused on what can counties do, where is that development, and it's usually going to be where there is infrastructure, then how do we still do that in a way that really honors livability in any community? So,
And what I'm concerned about is the lack of affordable housing has degraded the livability. When we look at the water situation in Evergreen Acres, we look at the septage, I'm learning to say that word, Monica, septage issues all over the county. When we look at the rural fire protection districts who are dependent on volunteers, and Elsie Vine Maple Fire District and Hamlet Fire District had a long conversation with the chair of the Fire Defense Board, Chief Crutchfield. He had me in tears a couple of times talking about volunteer firefighters, about their devotion to the well-being of their community, about their work ethic, but about their physical limits and constraints. We have an economy where people don't make enough money to buy housing. That's the core issue. What can we do that mitigates that. I mean, I don't know if we can have, here's my dream, right? Because you gotta have a vision. What if we could get a mass plywood panel triplex or fourplex? Could that be on a septic system? Is that possible? It's
Potentially, yeah.
legal. Well, because if we look at where do people live and work, there are affluent areas down in southwest Clatsop County where there are, I would call them support people, or clearly service people. We have service people all over. We have teachers, we have gas station people, we have car mechanics. We've got everybody all over with that missing middle housing. So yes, even though the study said we need housing everywhere on the spectrum, I would like us to focus on the missing middle, because that's the people who make a community really work. And that affects everybody, rich or poor, anybody.
And to dovetail on that, I think we're only missing Alyssa from our housing task force meetings, but workforce housing is critical. I know a lot of people spend so much time on affordable housing and, if we spend equal time on workforce and market-based, if you have more of that, especially that workforce housing, it will alleviate pressure on the low income or, or the affordable housing equation, because there's a lot of people housed in these facilities, in these homes, in these apartments that actually could live in workforce housing, but it's not available. And if you actually have workforce housing, then they will shift and transition, and that will open up quite a bit of opportunity in affordable housing. So it's all part of that greater equation, so we have to, it's just like everything in life, there's a flow, you might start here, but you don't have a place to go, you're stuck right here. So we have to provide that flow so people can get, move on and then make more housing here available. So it's not all about creating more, sometimes just making sure it's available.
I think it's about creating more.
I said it's not all about.
I just know of school districts and other job opportunity folks, agencies, that if a fourplex could be built near a rural district or a rural community, it would alleviate the constant need to search for new employees and the constant cycling through people that choose not to stay in our community because they can't either afford it or find housing. And when I look at our goals back from October, reduce time for applicants to receive approvals, reduce application fees when possible, create a process that is simple and easy to understand, encourage the construction of housing at all price points. I feel like those goals are still relevant, and I want to keep moving forward in hopes that we can open up that middle workforce that right now is really getting pinched out, and they do make a community go round. And without that workforce, we don't have the volunteers, we don't have the ability to help assist other groups. And so, yeah, let's keep moving forward and explore.
And I don't know if you know this, but Jewel School actually did a fourplex for their employees.
I'm thinking of another school district.
I know you are, but they're right now, they're just coming back.
That's good.
Okay, so I've heard some input from your board about other things that we should consider. I think there's a big focus on especially the workforce housing component. Possibly looking at applying prohibitions on using new housing as short-term rentals. Am I understanding that one correctly? So housing built under these rule changes would be prohibited from short-term rentals. Am I
I'd like to see.
understanding that correctly, or am I making things up here?
I'm hesitant to make generic statements like that,
Okay.
But I would say with the short-term rental conversation, I assume on our docket coming up, I feel like the short-term rental concerns will be resolved at that time. And like, I'm fully open to that conversation when it occurs. And I think that if we muddy the waters too much, these are our goals right now. And I don't want to muddy the waters with outside conversations that will be solved by this commission. It's just, we need to sit down and have that conversation, which is very much, I think, separate from these four goals.
Thank you for that clarification. Am I missing anything? Are there any other items or pathways that you think staff should be exploring? We tried to be pretty thorough and laid out a lot of options for you, but I don't know, over the past few months, you may have run into new ideas or had some different thoughts or working with constituents about items you might want staff to explore.
I'm really concerned about firefighter housing. All through the county, if there's a way we can support volunteer firefighters by doing something about housing. I think that helps both incorporated areas and rural Clackamas County.
Well, we did, I mean, a great example, for instance, is I think it's the goal section to build in, what district is that?
It was down in Archcade. Yeah,
Archcade.
they didn't move forward with the project. Your board approved the fee waiver, but they never moved forward.
Oh, really?
Neighbors objected.
Oh,
So they've still been looking for, how do we house our firefighters?
yeah, I think
And,
that was what you heard, but.
well, yeah, so I think that part of the workforce is essential. It's not just fighting fires, it's EMTs, it's Highway 26. When things blow up with a fire district, we don't have coverage for anybody traveling. I mean, yes, adjoining fire districts they come from Cannon Beach, from Seaside, from Banks, but that's not a long-term sustainable. So we, well, I mean, yeah, that's a whole additional conversation, but if we can help with the housing, that's gonna help with the fire districts. If we also, look at developing water infrastructure, these are peripheral. And gotta have water, you gotta handle the wastewater and the drainage. Because what we've seen in Arch Cape, I think, is that development happened without considering adequate drainage. Now we're paying the price for that. It's so to the extent we can tie in with federal money, because there's some federal programs, so that we're drawing in all of those funding streams to have a complete and sustainable community development. That's what I'm looking for. I don't know if that was the question you asked, but that's the one I wanted to answer.
Okay, so unless you have more questions for me at this point, as I've understood the conversation this evening, staff is going to move forward with beginning to schedule the public hearings. We have some notification requirements, both to DLCD and to the special districts, that will have to go out before we can actually move into the public hearings with the planning commission, but we will begin that work and keep you apprised of our status.
I see this as a long game process. I don't see this as a shorter conversation. So, in regards to the short-term rental, did ask, please circle back when that is on our agenda or on the plate so that we can address it.
Okay, got it on my list.
I think what we keep hearing from people is that the short-term rental, especially in the southwest part of the county, is gonna continue to come up. We have to address. I don't see any,
It's my district, and I'll
anyway.
make sure it gets spoken for, trust me.
well,
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gail. Appreciate it. Thanks for all your hard work on this.
yeah, I loved the way you handled those questions. I really did. That was really good.
Okay, so we still have board topics for discussion. Anybody have anything you want to bring up at this time?
Is there any legislation that anybody would like to talk about as a group or?
Michelle?
Go ahead on, you testified for, you're talking to the volleyball teammate, chair of the.
Of the committee, that was funny.
Oh.
When you stopped and said there's a question, literally what was running through my head is I have zero statistics for any question that he asks in here, but no, it was a pretty easy conversation. No, So both Commissioner Thompson and I testified on the Highway 30 study request, bill that Senator Weber placed out. And I feel like our comments and the comments that followed were very persuasive. So hopefully we have something similar as to the Highway 6 bill that Senator Weber was successful with. And then I'll let Commissioner Thompson speak to the why both of us are pushing forward and hoping.
Well, here's the deal. ODOT's underfunded, and there's not, I would say, a trusting communication between the state legislature and ODOT in some cases. What my role, because I look at the statewide system issue, so I don't want to fund a study for Highway 30 and defund somebody else's transportation system plan update, which is how kind of it's spoken. But when a legislative aide says to me, Commissioner, if you want to get construction dollars to do something about the safety operations and maintenance funding for Highway 30, you would be advised to speak in favor of this. Okay, then, never mind the broader system issues. If we are going to successfully advocate for money to fix problems in Clatsop County, this is the opportunity. But that's a challenging kind of conversation, because we want to be good team players. We want to play well with ODOT. We want the legislature to welcome us. But when I say at the end of my testimony, and we're coming back in 25 for construction dollars, I don't know, at the end of the hearing, you know, the co-chair said, look, we've got all of these good ideas before us. People are going to be coming to us for money. So this is like everything else, it's a marathon. It's a longer term issue where there are issues that pop up in individual communities. It's complicated and we're going to keep at it, but it was, I think, a good hearing. I think we're likely to succeed. It was remarkable teamwork from all of the electeds.
Great. Yeah, thank you for doing that. Anything else?
I am missing from the long session, the spreadsheet and the testimonial point, click, read situation from Amanda. So I don't know if we can
Yeah, we have,
resuscitate that system and start resharing.
yeah, we do have the spreadsheet, so I'll make sure that they get.
That would be
Again.
fabulous.
She's been sending them, right?
Yeah, we've been,
Weekly stuff, but not.
yeah, and we don't have, you know, we had to pull through all the legislation and come down to the ones that were county impacts, and so we have like the high impact, the medium, and the low, and then we're watching some of them, not watching others, and so let me have Amanda send that out. She's probably listening anyhow.
I see one from last week. Okay, I must have missed that somehow, because I've been looking for
We
it.
got one on Tuesday. It'll happen.
Yeah, she will continue as I know your board knows, things during the short session happen so quickly. And there's so many things happening. It's really kind of layered, and so Amanda's certainly gonna try to stay on top of it, but it does get a little complicated. The other thing that we're doing right now that also is taking some of that workload is that we're working with our federal legislation on getting the congressionally directed spending applications in, which is also part of what Amanda's working on. So there's both the federal side and the state side that are going on
She sent out a
at
letter
the same,
about
yeah.
that.
Yeah, and you'll see support letters going out on certain topics. There was one recently about community corrections funding, which obviously we and the sheriff feel really strongly about. I mean, it's a pact that the county and the state have had to have the state pay for it, and over time it's slowly dwindled. And so,
That came through AOC and Jen Goffin, and I reached.
Yeah.
Say, we have, Clatsop County, has now a presence at AOC, which is really good, and I'm grateful that we're doing that. The rest of our colleagues are from around the state are at NACO now. they're lobbying directly to federal legislators. We're not part of that. If there is a way that we can expand our scope to have elected commissioners coming as part of a body of elected commissioners to do that lobbying in Washington, DC as part of NACO, that's very effective strategy. So if we can expand our scope to deal with that, it's great that staff is doing it, but the most powerful and most effective results derive from staff and the elected county commissioners doing all that. So you didn't have enough to feel guilty or
No, I
overwhelmed about. Well, it's just out there and other people are taking advantage of it. And I would like to see us get more impact by being part of that effort.
I agree, but on a side note, House Bill 4106 is coming up. Rep. Javity is the one launching it. It's a transparency bill. I've read the bill in its fullest. CFTLC voted to support this bill, but it's basically, it directs the state forester to establish harvest levels for harvesting timber on state forest land, rather than working off of the premise of here's the best that we can possibly do on state lands in any given year. This actually says that you have to have an updated inventory, and it's transparency. It doesn't force any levers to be pulled. It is just a transparency bill, and I feel like in the situation that we are currently in, we need transparency as much as possible, because being always provided overinflated numbers doesn't help our workforce, and it also doesn't help us with financial planning in the future, and any of our small districts, it doesn't help. And with the fact that we are still nowhere in regards to how to deal with our direct payments with the state, and there is no meeting coming up and no updates coming up on how we are going to deal with direct payments and how the state is going to or not going to assist us.
Well, there's a lot of things going on. Jeff Golden has a bill that I'm certainly supportive to consider reinstating the excise tax on timber. I believe that's kind of the best way to go, but the 4106 is interesting. I just downloaded it today. I think it's terrific though. And because it gives predictability, and I do have a question about how it changes from how it's different from the forest management plan that we do, that ODF does do, but it seemed a little sharper. It seemed a little bit sharper. I think it's well worth supporting. And I don't know if that bill is on the list for sale and guide.
It's on,
4106.
yeah, it is on I think it's under review right now, so,
Yeah, in fact, I think there's a hearing tomorrow.
yeah. So, yeah, I think that, one of the things that the county and through the small table group that's been meeting down at the governor's office with the governor's staff, that's been a very specific conversation about what are the tools, and when I say tools, I mean, what are the levers that the governor's office through the legislature is willing to put into play to immediately help the impacted taxing entities. Because there's a lot of strategies that are longer term revenue generating strategies. I think I don't want to speak for the TFTLC counties, but I think for the counties, it's just the urgency of having a known strategy to deal with what is upcoming. And that's where I don't think we've made a lot of definitive, concrete progress in what those strategies might be, because they are big numbers, and big numbers always complicate, solution. And so I just think that's not something that we're gonna know about between now and the long session. And so it'll be interesting to see where those small group discussions go over time, but I think just sitting in the county manager's chair, you know, having some intervention sooner the better, knowing that there may be longer term solutions, but I think for every taxing entity, having some predictability is really important. And that's all we can hope for, but so far we don't have a strategy to get us there. So.
And with the burbling that is occurring at the state level, of avenues of way to attain funding for all of the things. We are not directly spoken to or promised any of that funding. So if they receive, an approval or pass bills that take tax dollars or further tax landowners, so on and so forth, we are not identified as that's not our solution. That is somebody else's money for somebody else's interest. We have been promised nothing. And I think that is something that we need to be like really transparent about, is that, yeah, sure, there are a lot of legislators at the state level that have some ideas on how to fund some special interests, but we are not directly spoken about. We are not, and this is not a solution for us, because we are not identified within that said solution. And so, I mean,
Not an empowering relationship, is it?
no. And so I feel like when I see bills being launched that are going to pass, you know, potentially tax landowners, or an additional timber tax, those monies aren't going to be promised to us. So I wouldn't be willing to support such a situation.
Well, and here's the thing, at COLPAC, we had a whole session on the HCP and the impact of it. And Commissioner Banks spoke very eloquently about it. I asked specifically about the tax rates of the timber industry. There's apparently an Ernst & Young analysis that says the timber industry is taxed higher than other industries in Oregon. So I know that Senator Golden has strong feelings about that, but Ernst & Young is pretty compelling. So I'm reluctant to follow the lead of an assertion by a legislator that is contradicted by an Ernst & Young study. So I think there's further evaluation
My
of the
son
data.
works for Ernst & Young, and so I'll ask him for that study.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because these are all complex. And if we have data and have a reasonable discussion of the data, but we all perceive what fits our values and beliefs and prejudices. I learned that when I was a freshman in college from Dr. Milton Rokich. And to see the different ways we look at different pieces of the data. So to the extent we can get a complete picture and then communicate as a body, as a team, and thread the needle so that we both heal the planet and address the needs of the people. Because if we don't do both, we lose. We'll do neither. We do both or we do neither. Heal the planet, address the needs of the people, both. And by the way, part of what COLPAC did, just to follow up on that, it's not directly related to pending legislation, but COLPAC is sending a letter to the state forester to ask him to consult further about a moderate habitat conservation plan. And that's the economic development district that is Columbia, Clatsop, Tillamook, and Western Washington counties. So that's going forward, recognizing that everybody says we're for habitat conservation plans. And now what? And now what? We're kind of like that in most things, aren't we?
Well, not all.
I was just gonna make note that the 4106 has been removed from the work session agenda tomorrow. So that kind of tells me the
Okay.
tone of legislature in regards to Clackamas County.
Well, if I might, Commissioner,
Yes.
I think one of the things, and this is a broader issue, and so far I don't think any of the conversations have kind of got to the underlying challenge, but what is the underlying challenge is just local governance, government financing, and I think that you know, there is a carrying capacity for local government financing, meaning property taxes can only take you so far. And in Oregon, there's not a lot of other really viable options that are outside the property tax venue. I mean, you can do little things, but they're not impactful things. And so the reality is that when you lose, and it could be any kind of a revenue, right? It doesn't have to just be a natural resource-based revenue. It could be any revenue. If that revenue is non-property tax based and if it is decreased significantly or it goes away, there's very limited options for local governments to make that up.
Yeah.
And the one thing that, and I've said this before, so I hate to repeat myself, but one thing that we've learned from the ONC counties and other counties is that when you lose a revenue that is a large revenue source that provides essential services, it's very difficult, even when it's essential services, to get your local community to pay for what somebody else took away. Even when it's critical, even when it's paying for law enforcement, even when it's paying for health and human services, they don't want to pay for what is being lost. And you can understand that, but that's why I think what the counties have asked for is that we know there's a larger discussion about how financing works for really local governments. But we can't solve that problem. We need to have a balanced budget. And we need to provide quality service levels and the right service levels for what the community needs. And so that's one fundamental thing that's still not being discussed in a cogent way at the state level. And I don't know, it's almost like how many times does something have to happen to a rural community to have that become part of the equation before something happens? I mean, these are things that we have to solve before something bad happens. Because one of my fears always is that what is urgent now is going to be trumped 10 times with 10 other urgent issues in another year, in another 2 years. And so again, local governments do what we do because there's some predictability to our finances. Any local government that doesn't have predictability doesn't have the service levels and doesn't have the quality of services. You have to have predictable funding. And so that's my biggest concern still as we move forward, because there's a lot about local government financing that if you take away a large revenue source, there are not just easy ways to make it up. And I just want to reinforce this, is that 90 to 95% of the general fund goes to personnel. Half of that goes to law enforcement, public safety. So there's not much you can do without reducing staffing levels, and really half of whatever you reduce is in public safety. And so it's just, there's no, for local governments, people will say, well, cut the waste, or, there isn't any of that. We're already very mission focused. You can always make value calls, but those would be tough for really any board.
Okay, you're depressing me now. Here's what I want to tell you I'm doing. I've been some chair of this AOC Governance and Revenue Committee. And I've got to buy off of my co-chair and staff, bless you, and the staffer and the current president of AOC and the second vice president and the first vice president of AOC. We're going to look at local government revenues in Oregon, because that's the only thing I know how to do, because I've heard you say that. We can't take care of it in Clatsop County. But if we have that larger conversation and we consider broadly the data and the problem, and I called Tim Nesbitt. In my contacts, it says Tim Nesbitt, under company, it says smart guy, right? So I called him and said, could we talk about this? He's willing to have a meal. I talked to Mallory Robert today. If he's willing to have a meal, if we can find some money for him, then maybe he can work with us so that we can have the conversation, because it's cities outside of Portland. And that's unfair, isn't it? But it's true. And rural Oregon, that we don't have the money, generally speaking. But if you look in I read the papers, Portland and the state are awash, millions and I mean, it makes my eyes roll around in my head, but we don't have it. We have needs. We need predictability. We need adequate income, predictable, adequate income. So that's all I can do to try and respond to what you're saying. But if anybody else has better ideas, I'm happy to.
No, to your point, if you're on budget and finance, I mean, from a business standpoint, purely looking at this.
Yeah.
I've nowhere that I've read, I've tried to find anything on the state level that ODF is going to review budget, cut budget, because if they decrease revenue, it's gonna happen. They haven't even, there's no forethought of, okay.
No, they've
they-
actually increased spending.
So where's this money coming from? It's not gonna come to us. So where are they getting it from? Who's gonna be taxed? Who, you know, where, so if you're looking at that budget, I'd like transparency on that. They're anticipating spending more, that level or more, but decreasing the income level, where is that coming from? And how do you attack without trimming? I mean, you run a business, that way you're out of business.
Well, one of the issues for me is that I've worked in several states now. Oregon simply has the worst tax system of any state I have ever worked for. We have no sales tax. There is not another state in this nation that has as large a tourism sector of their economy as we do, who does not have a sales tax aimed at tourism. I mean, it's, if you've ever taken an economics course and you know what input output analysis is, the best place to get your money is from outside where you have to spend it. And we don't do that. We don't do that. I mean, every governor since in the last 30 years that I've been in Oregon has promised an analysis of the tax. We have Measure 5, we have Measure 50, and we have no sales tax. I mean, it's a basic, we allow industries like the timber industry to come in and negotiate huge tax cuts. And we allow it to happen. And they buy politicians, some of whom were sitting at this
Point of
table.
order, Chair, the forum.
Well, can we adjourn or something so we deal with the quorum issues, please?
Well, do we have anything else that we need to do?
Nothing.
Is that it? Okay. Let's go ahead and take an 11-minute break and then we'll start with our regular session.
Batteries gonna die.